Hi, today we are at Fort Eby State Park in Whidbey Island, Washington. We are on traditional lands of the Coast Salish nations, including the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Squamish, Skalalem, Stillaguamish, and on treaty territory of the Hulkaminam Treaty Group. We will be harvesting nori, a common edible seaweed all over the globe, and you may know of nori from eating sushi and seaweed snacks, but you might not recognize them on the beach. So you probably recognize nori as being a dark green color, but nori is actually a red seaweed, so under the Rhodophyta category of seaweeds. When nori is fresh, they're a reddish purple or greenish brown color, and they have the consistency of cellophane, so they're quite thin and transparent and shiny. The blades are only 2 cell layers thick. When nori is dry, they can be a black color and quite brittle. Nori seaweeds for decades were grouped under the one genus Porphyra, derived from the Greek word purple garment. More recently, the seaweeds in the Pacific coast that were once grouped under the Porphyra genus are now regrouped into the genus Pyropia. So Porphyra belongs to the Atlantic groupings and Pyropia belongs to the Pacific groupings. Both Pyropia and Porphyra are all still nori, but because most of these classification changes are all very recent, most of my research is on the Porphyra abate variety because this was considered one of the tastiest for First Nations in British Columbia. Nori probably has more names than any other seaweed because they're so common and delicious and probably one of the most used nutritionally throughout the ages around the world. So there are probably words for nori in ancient languages everywhere. There's a word in ancient Greek for purple cloth, which is where the Latin word for Porphyra came from. And there are a number of words in languages of indigenous tribes in California and First Nations in British Columbia for nori in particular. So among the Saanich, the Squamish, the Halkomelem, and the Quotsin, nori is called flakes. Among the Gitsin, flakeschu, and Haida, skew. There are a number of other terms for seaweeds that are used when they're too old to eat or for specific varieties of Porphyra that were available only in winter seasons. In Japan, where Porphyra is called nori, sheets of compressed Porphyra are eaten with rice as sushi. In Wales, Porphyra is called laver and is boiled to form a thick paste which is mixed with oats and fried to make laver bread, a favorite dish. In Scotland, Porphyra is called sloke or slake, apparently from Gaelic. The Irish also eat laver and call it schlacken, also from Gaelic. Nori appears on rocky shorelines throughout the world, including a few species in the tropics or at the poles. The greatest diversity is found in cold to temperate and boreal regions. In the North Pacific region, nori is distributed from Alaska to Mexico. Unlike most red algae, which grow in the low intertidal or subtidal zone, Porphyra species tend to grow at the mid to high intertidal regions, and they often grow in dense homogeneous patches. Be sure to do research beforehand on local beaches that are approved and safe for harvesting and tested regularly. In Washington state, do not harvest seaweeds from restricted beaches. The Department of Health identifies restricted or polluted beaches to avoid. All state park beaches are closed to seaweed harvest except for Fort Flagler, Fort Eby, and Fort Worden, but you should always check the Washington Department of Health shellfish safety information for recent closures. So what you'll need for your seaweed harvesting excursion, first you'll need a license. So I got my license from Fred Meyer for $17 for seaweed and shellfish harvesting, and you can pay a couple extra dollars for crab harvesting as well. But you'll need that before you arrive. You'll also want plenty of baggies to put your seaweed in. So I have just some Ziploc bags with the label of where I'm at, the date, and the seaweed that will be going in this bag. So nori will be in this bag. You'll also want a harvesting knife or scissors. You'll want a cooler so that your seaweed stays fresh, because it can sort of become icky if it stays out in the heat too long. So make sure to have a cooler with ice or some ice packs. You'll also want to bring snacks and water to stay hydrated. You'll want to bring sunscreen or a sun hat and sunglasses, wet shoes, and preferably closed-toed so you don't get any cuts, and then a wetsuit or wet pants, but today I'm just wearing shorts. Many county and city parks have additional rules, so before harvesting, it is important to check the local area rules. In Washington, you're allowed to harvest up to 10 pounds wet weight per day per person. You should always use a knife or scissors to cut the seaweeds rather than pull from the base. This will allow the seaweeds to continue growing. How much to cut depends on the seaweed. For nori, I've been taught to cut about a fourth above the base. As a sustainable harvesting practice, I would spot pick nori and only take what you need. Once gathered, I like to rinse the nori in seawater to remove any sand or critters hiding in the fronds. Place the nori in a plastic bag and store them in the ice chest. Seaweeds are important components of marine ecosystems and form the foundation of many marine food webs. Fishes, birds, snails, crabs, and marine mammals use kelp beds for refuge, feeding, spawning, and nursing grounds. Preserving productive kelp beds by sustainable harvest practices assures that seaweed will grow back for future harvests and continue to nourish sea life. Before you leave the beach, take the time to give thanks to the ocean and all the nutrients in life the ocean supports. Once home, you can store your nori in the freezer until you're ready to use it, or you can dry the nori by either sun drying it for 3 to 5 hours in full direct sunlight. So another way to prepare seaweed is to dry it in the oven on a really low temperature. So once the seaweed has defrosted from my freezer, I just laid it out. I tried to pull it apart as much as I could, and I've actually done 3 other bakes. So just make sure that there's enough space on the pan, and you'll want to bake at around 150 for 15 to 20 minutes, and you want to check maybe every 7 to 10 minutes and flip the seaweed. What you're looking for is a very crispy seaweed that you can kind of crunch in your hands. You don't want it to be super tender, because that means that there's still moisture in the seaweed. While you're waiting for some of the nori to dry, you can snack on the stuff that's already dried. You can now use the dried nori to make a seaweed snack by adding seasoning and sesame oil, and then just retoasting to get some extra crispness. You can make furikake, which is a Japanese seasoning of dried nori pieces, toasted sesame seeds, salt, and spices. And you can rehydrate the nori in soups, as well as use the dried nori as a recipe component, which is what we will be doing. We're here in Seattle at my mom's kitchen because I really wanted to share this recipe with her. And we're going to be making green tea and nori ice cream with melting sugar cinnamon sea lettuce on top. And I really love this recipe because I think it just shows the variety of dishes that you can make with seaweeds. But also I loved how this recipe combined nori and sea lettuce because they grow right next to each other. This recipe is from Prannie Rhatigan's Irish Seaweed Kitchen cookbook. To begin, you'll want to prepare the nori flakes. Nori is quite hydrophilic, so even after drying, it might be a little tender, so you may want to re-crisp the nori for 10 minutes at 150 degrees Fahrenheit before processing it in the food processor. You'll want to process the nori until it is a flaky consistency. So the recipe calls for 1 Crunchie Bar, but you can actually make your own Crunchie Bars, and it's pretty easy. On medium heat, combine 1/2 cup of sugar and 4 tablespoons of honey, and stir and simmer until the mixture turns the color of maple syrup. This should take about 2 to 3 minutes. Turn off the heat and get prepared with your whisk and spatula because the next step happens really quick. Whisk in 1½ teaspoons of baking soda and watch the syrup turn into a thick foam. Quickly stop whisking and use your spatula to pour this immediately onto a piece of baking parchment on a baking sheet. Leave until set cold and then break it into little pieces. You'll want to wash your pot with hot water right away so that the sticky mixture will melt off. Crunchie bars are usually coated in chocolate, so I'm just using about 3/5 of a chocolate bar, and I'm crushing that up into little pieces. You need 125 grams of meringues, and I got my meringues at Trader Joe's, and I counted out that to be about 14 meringue cookies. Crush the meringues in a plastic bag to resemble breadcrumbs. You'll need 23½ ounces of whipping cream, which is about 3 cups. Whip the cream on high speed for 2 minutes until the cream forms stiff peaks. Little by little, sprinkle in 1 heaping tablespoon of green tea powder, folding in gently. Mix together the chocolate bits and homemade Crunchie Bar with the crushed meringues, along with 1 heaping tablespoon of nori flakes mixed with 2 to 3 tablespoons of water and 1/2 cup of flaked almonds. I added a little bit more nori flakes. Add as much as you'd like of this mixture to the green tea whipped cream. Gently fold in. Spoon the ice cream into a glass freezer-proof dish and cover and place in the freezer for 4 hours or until firm. For the sea lettuce garnish, take a handful of sea lettuce leaves and dry the sea lettuce completely by patting it dry with a kitchen paper towel. Place 1 tablespoon of fine sugar and 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon in a brown paper bag, shake to mix and set aside. Heat 1 to 2 tablespoons of olive oil until hot in a pan and shallow fry the sea lettuce leaves for a few seconds. Drain on a dry kitchen paper towel and then toss the fried sea lettuce into the bag of prepared cinnamon sugar to coat.